Welcome to my presentation on Is nationalism compatible with ethnic and cultural diversity? So, we'll start off by defining these two key terms, nationalism and then ethnic and cultural diversity. Nationalism, and we're going to be referencing Andrew Hayward, the 2021 version of his Political Ideologies book. He defines nationalism as the belief that nation is the central principle of a political organization, emphasizing that political loyalty should only really be to the nation state. So it's kind of this modern way of thinking that the nation is the most important part in politics, it's the key actor. It has a more important role than corporations or individuals at a smaller scale. It really comes down to nation states negotiating between each other. And then obviously, what defines a nation state? Well, for Hayward, humanity is actually naturally divided up into these distinct nations, and elements like language and religion and sort of shared cultures and beliefs, these are what define a nation. And each of these unique identities have a right to self-determination, so they have a right to their own land, and that land is theirs. They can make their own laws. The Treaty of Westphalia sort of and the Rome Statute go into this, where each country has its own laws and no one else really gets to intervene with that, which obviously links to Western democracy. And then ethnic and cultural diversity is not exactly the opposite, but it's the coexistence of multiple ethnic groups or religions and traditions within one society. So this is really that melting pot idea where different customs and values all come together in one location. Uh, and obviously, people have differing opinions on this. It can, and I've put in the slideshow, it can enrich social, cultural, political life because innovation, tolerance, these progressive ideals arise out of diversity, but obviously people are going to go against it and say it's a bad thing, uh, especially the stronger nationalists, which we're going to get into in a second. So, inclusive nationalism is all about allowing this big melting pot of cultures and rights and allowing the national identity to reflect this instead of having it on a single ethnicity or culture. So, this presentation is going to focus on Native Americans in the United States and how their integration has or hasn't been representative of sort of the nationalist project within America. So, what would be inclusive would be incorporating these perspectives in education and public ceremonies. However, exclusive nationalism. Now, this is where one ethnic cultural group dominates the country, dominates the nation, and naturally, as a result, minority groups are suppressed and marginalized. And this is the case of the United States. The dominant form of nationalism in most nation states, most settler colonial states like the United States, uh, where what I put here is that Native Americans were seen as incompatible with the national project, which is quite a strong image. And we've got a citation down here that I put with in many schools, indigenous languages and traditions were actually forced out, and many native children were forced to learn Christian values and English and to sort of forget their original native languages. So many nation states portray this single national identity to the world. United States, this is all about freedom, liberty, justice for all, and it's forgetting that horrible settler past, even though a quarter of all Americans are not white. they're either Latino, they're black, or any other ethnicity. And this means there are obviously naturally different range of cultures in this country. And the amount of Native Americans is only going down. I mean, it's only 5 million. And this is pretty much because of manifest destiny, which is this idea that many Americans, when they settled on the land, that they had this divine right, they had this right to the land, and what they were going to do with it was the right thing to do. It was the intended sort of use of the land, and anyone in the way should sort of just be pushed out of the way because they're sort of hindering progress. So you can see at the top, Native Americans only own 2% of the land from 100, which is a dramatic shift in only 200 years. So you can see how fast this colonialization happens. And then obviously it's quite famous, the Trail of Tears uh, started in Florida, really, and Georgia, with 4,000 Native Americans being forcibly removed from their homes and relocated into um, designated land. And then obviously, yeah, Manifest Destiny. Uh, in California specifically, Destiny had awarded California to the Americans to develop, and that if the natives interfered with progress, they should be pushed aside. So obviously, this completely disregards many of the native cultural contributions to the country itself. So although nationalists pride themselves in their contributions to the country, many contributions were actually native and are forgotten about. So the Iroquois Confederacy, which was in New York, between five of the tribes, actually was a sort of a blueprint for the democracy that was represented in the US Constitution later on. It was a big thing for Native Americans to have consensus building, respecting each other's voices. This shaped American ideas about governance. And then obviously smaller cultural things, many words and foods uh, that are sort of widely used in Northern America were widely used before the Pilgrims settled. Turkey and corn, words like canoe and hurricane and tomahawk. Uh, these all had been taken from the Native Americans, which is sort of a form of, it is a form of theft, but it's a cultural form of theft. Planting, companion planting, which is growing three types of seeds together because it grows better. These sort of agricultural techniques, which show that the Native Americans were very advanced, have just been taken and brushed aside, even though they are quite advanced. It's just been brushed, and a picture has been painted that Native Americans weren't intelligent, they were just savage, which was actually written by Thomas Jefferson in the Constitution, describing them as savages. Uh, and then, of course, yeah, we've got storytelling techniques, oral traditions, has inspired much modern artistic works. So, through a long process of assimilation, Native Americans went out uh, slowly through many of the children being taught Christianity and many of the schools that the children were forced to go to, not teaching at all about Native history. So here we have the Carlisle Indian Industrial School forbade students from speaking in their languages, practicing their religions, or wearing traditional clothing. And then the government itself established the courts of Indian offences, which criminalized ceremonies such as the Sundance. And then we have things like the Dawes Act, which divide the tribal lands up into individual plots for native families. And then any land that they deemed as surplus, they sold to non-natives. So obviously, even in modern day, the nationalism that is presented by the USA misrepresents indigenous people by just portraying them as something in the past, something that was overcame, and it's not important to reminisce on anymore. It's really never talked about in the news, uh, and that either they're shown as stereotypes where it's just completely sort of dialed all the way up, or they're completely forgotten about. Now, of course, as we mentioned earlier, 5 million Native Americans still exist. However, the lives that they face nowadays is very tough. They are forced into marginalized spaces, so they have many reservations. However, these reservations, it's very tough to live on because access to healthcare is very limited, access to education is very limited, getting a job is very hard. It's really not easy, even though they have this land, it's not easy to sort of, if they wanted to assimilate into Western American culture, it's not easy if you were born here. And this is all because of things like Manifest Destiny. Uh, and then on the other hand, there's a lack of education for non-native students, where I've got here an article where they sort of look at the teachings of non-native students, and Native Americans are really just portrayed as stereotypes in schools for younger children. So from an early age, it's all they know of these native people, even though they still exist. They're just shown in sort of Thanksgiving, uh, education, and it's really ignoring the contemporary issues that many Native Americans face. Okay, we've got two last slides, which are slightly more positive. So there have been some better developments, which is arguably better. So the Indigenous Peoples Day, which is the second Monday of October every year, it's a small step, but it recognizes that there is something to be said. It's an important part of America's history, and in many places nowadays, it's actually celebrated over Columbus Day, Christopher Columbus, who famously came to America, and it's the reason why many Native Americans and indigenous people are wrongly called Indians because he thought he'd arrived in India. Now, lastly, a very big positive is there has been a resurgence of Native American culture in the last perhaps 30 years as the world has become more globalized. Many indigenous people have sought out to reclaim their language, protect the land that they've been born into, and this is pushing back against that American ideal that they have no place in one society. It really is, uh, as I said at the end, fostering a deeper and more authentic understanding of the nation's identity and what it means to be sort of nationalist in America. So thank you for listening. Here are my citations. Thank you very much.